Welcome to the Motherhood Alliance podcast, the podcast dedicated to empowering moms and families on their health and wellness journey. I'm Brittany Suttner.
And I'm Andrea Rinkus. Together, we're here to explore holistic approaches that go beyond conventional medicine.
Each week, we dive into topics that matter most to you. Everything from nutrition and mental health to alternative therapies and natural living.
And whether you're a new mom navigating the early stages of parenthood or a seasoned pro looking for new ways to support your family's well-being, you're in the right place.
Even better, all of our guests are local small business owners who you can actually talk to and work with. You can learn more about today's guest and connect with hundreds of other health and wellness professionals through our informative and easy-to-use directory at motherhoodalliance.com.
Before we get started, keep in mind that this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for personal healthcare advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any changes based on the podcast content.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Are you ready to help your family thrive? Let's get started. Hi friends, we are Britt and Drea from motherhoodalliance.com, and we are excited to welcome you to a 4-episode series with Tabitha Uitenbroek, who's a board-certified family nurse practitioner and the owner of Löyly Family Practice based out of Appleton, Wisconsin. Since Tabitha was young, her mom recognized her as a natural caregiver, so it was no surprise when she became a certified nursing assistant in her teen years. After later finishing nursing school, she spent 13 years in hospital-based nursing, gaining experience in surgical care, orthopedics, and emergency care. Eventually, she felt too helpless within the corporate machine and wanted to be able to help patients on their own terms, so it became clear that pursuing additional training to become a nurse practitioner so she could start her own independent practice was next. Tabitha opened Löyly in 2022 and is now locally known as a patient-centered provider who beautifully balances traditional medicine with a holistic approach. She loves what she does and often says, "I'm here to stay because God has planted me squarely in this place." Tabitha is married to her husband, Andy, who's a freelance graphic designer, and she's a mom to 2 amazing boys, Oliver and Leaf. Tabitha and her husband creatively homeschool between both of their workloads, and as a family, they love to travel together. We recommend listening to this 4-part series in order, as many of the episodes reference prior episodes from the series. We had fun discussing some higher-level topics, like the importance of choosing a patient-focused healthcare provider in episode 1, and why self-pay is smart even when you have insurance in episode 2, along with some life application conversations, like how to take a preventative approach in your family's health journey in episode 3, and preventative medicine, which labs should you get and when, in episode 4. Okay, friends, get ready to learn a lot from Tabitha. I sure did. Let's dive into today's conversation. Hello, welcome back. We are excited to be back for episode 2 with Tabitha, and today we're talking about why self-pay is smart even when you have insurance. So I think for a conversation like this, it's always good to kind of back up a little bit and maybe look at the history of insurance. So Tabitha, can you tell us, how did insurance originally come to be and how has it changed?
Insurance started as a way 100 years ago-ish to cover those long-term unexpected health costs. So it wasn't designed to be a completely comprehensive coverage for all of your healthcare needs forever. It was intended to be a crisis sort of a response, which made really good sense. And then over time, that kind of dissolved into we'll use insurance to cover certain expenses over certain periods of time, and then you pay more to cover for that. And then it turned into today's expectation of, I pay my premium, now pay all my bills. Why are you sending me a bill, hospital? I pay a really high premium. And now there's all of that nitty gritty of deductible and have I met it yet? And it's out of network or family versus individual deductible. It's become this really big monster. But the original intent was really good, covering crisis, unexpected cost. So I would love to see us go back to that kind of a model.
Yeah. So you're saying that typically for small things like cold, strep throat, ear infections, that would all be paid out of pocket typically, and insurance wouldn't be used for those?
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what is self-pay? How would you define that?
Self-pay was a totally new concept to me probably 3 years ago. I used to be one of those people who would say, well, I pay, $600, $700 a month for my premium working for a healthcare system. And then I had to hit thousands of dollars of deductible. And so that used to really frustrate me. And then all those quick care, fast care clinics popped up and it was just a flat rate. And I thought, oh, so I'm not using my insurance. It's cheaper. Interesting. And so that is what kind of turned on my mind to thinking about what does self-pay look like? And so then as I developed Löyly, we were looking at national models for concierge medicine, self-pay, direct-to-consumer healthcare is kind of the recognized buzzword for self-pay clinics. And I realized people are absolutely willing to pay, especially when it's a flat rate and they know what to expect going in. And it's generally cheaper than what you would pay with insurance. So self-pay depends on what specialty. If you're looking at my clinic, it's an a la carte menu of services. If you're looking at more of a concierge membership type of self-pay plan, then you pay a fixed monthly rate for access. And then you pay on top of that more a la carte for testing that you may need. If you're looking at physical therapy or occupational therapy or chiropractic, those sort of self-pay models could also be more of a bundled package versus paying for each individual date of service. But it's becoming a huge boom nationwide.
So it's not touching insurance at all?
No.
Okay. How do people typically pay for that? Is that coming out of their bank account? Do they typically use HSA, FSA? What do they use?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. So HSA, FSA dollars can be used towards that. I'm honestly been surprised in opening Löyly how many people still have HSAs or FSAs. I thought they had kind of moved out of the mainstay, but they seem to still be around, which is a wonderful way for people to use their insurance dollars.
Now, I think there's another option as well, and I'm not all that familiar, so I'm hoping you can enlighten me. But what is a healthcare sharing program, and how does that compare to traditional insurance?
Yeah. You may recognize them under the name of Samaritans or Christian Healthcare Ministries or MediShare. They've been around for decades. It's a way of pooling money together as mostly a Christian community. There's a newer one called Sedera that's more designed for secular, not religious based. But it's a way of paying in like you would a premium, but it goes in a larger bucket that then can be distributed as needed to members. And it is also designed kind of like that original insurance. It's not used for preventative care. It does have a minimum that you must hit as an individual or as a family. And then if you're hospitalized, if you have a heart attack, if you're having a baby, if you're having something outside of that wellness or minimal care need, then those dollars can be shared nationally with the larger program that you're part of.
So for acute visits, do you use any of that?
No.
Okay. So it goes back to kind of that old traditional insurance that you had mentioned where it's really just saved for the big things.
It's saved for the big things. And each of the programs has a different rule about what those big things may be. The other piece to that is it's not considered a medical expense in the eyes of the government. So if you put money into your HSA account as an employed individual, that is considered, tax-free, if you will, dollars, versus the money that you put towards a health sharing cannot be used as a medical expense deduction when it comes to the premiums. I say air quotes, even though you can't see me. It's not really a premium, but it's not recognized as insurance for that purpose.
Why?
Great question. And it's been under hot debate from our Congress for probably close to 10 years now, trying to get that switched.
Do you think it's because the bigger insurance companies they want them to come to them?
Yes.
Okay. So working with the Motherhood Alliance businesses, most of these are small businesses. They're more holistically, more wellness minded. And I would say 90% of the small businesses that I have met are self-pay. So why is that?
So a lot of businesses are choosing self-pay because they can directly relate that to the patient. So if you come see me, it's a flat rate. You can talk about as much as you want. You have my undivided attention for those 30 minutes. And I don't have to have that added expense of a whole team of people to handle billing and insurance. And then eventually that is costly to the business and somebody needs to absorb that cost. So, it goes back to the patient. So then costs end up rising. So it really is better for the business, better for the patient to just have an affordable rate that's transparent right from the get-go.
Yeah. And like we said, so many of these smaller wellness businesses are more preventative focused. So I guess a question I do have is, does insurance cover preventative screening or testing? Or is that another reason why some of these small businesses are like, no, we can't even do that, because a lot of the things that people are coming in to see me for because they want to be preventative in their health, it won't even be covered anyway.
Right. That kind of goes back to what we said in the first episode regarding clinical practice guidelines. So I used American Heart earlier. I'll just use them again. American Heart says a calcium score is a great idea. That's a low-dose CAT scan of the heart to see if there's any blockages. That's not covered by insurance, but it's offered really affordable, $50 usually, to have that done. So people just self-pay. In the mainstream healthcare arena, insurance doesn't cover that. But American Heart would cover blood pressure screenings or potentially a lipid panel, depending on your insurance program. And so some preventative things are seen as value added and worthy of coverage, and some are not. Things like mammograms in a patient who has no history, no abnormals in the past, they could have a quote free screening mammogram annually. Same for colonoscopy. If you meet the criteria without any history, that could be covered. Whereas if you wanted a deeper level hormone test to see if you're at any risk, or if you wanted a more comprehensive thyroid panel, those sort of things would not be considered preventative. Even if you're asymptomatic, they would be considered potentially not medically necessary, and then you'd be paying for them.
How do people figure out what's covered for them and what's not when it comes to prevention?
You could Google the CPT code, which is a procedural code, and you could Google the ICD-10 indication that you wanted to screen. So encounter for screening for other disease, for example, would be your ICD-10 that you could search for, and then a CPT of a thyroid globulin antibody, and then call your insurance company and say, hey, does my plan cover this CPT code for this ICD-10 reason? And they would say yes or no. So it takes a lot of footwork for the patient.
Okay. Now, what about wellness exams? Those are covered, right?
Generally, yeah, I've yet to find a primary insurance plan that does not cover an annual wellness visit. Big, however, in the old days, it was a physical. I went to the doc, height and weight, push on my belly, listen to my heart, lungs, all the things, ask me all sorts of questions about sleep and diet and developmental and all of that. Nowadays, it's a very similar exam, but if the patient asks questions like, I have this wart on my right toe, or I've been really constipated lately, now it becomes a problem-based visit. So now you went in for a wellness exam, your insurance will be billed as a wellness exam, but then you will be billed as a 99213 or 99203 for a complaint-based visit. So then you'll get a secondary office visit charge. Even if you ask for a refill on your established medication, it's the widely accepted practice now that you'll get a secondary bill that you will be responsible for during your free wellness visit.
That's insane.
It's very frustrating.
It seems like it should just be a physical, like this is your time to sit with a doctor and get any of your questions answered. But you're saying that's not the case, especially when you're using
it. Right. And there's a lot of dynamics as to why that is, but none of those are for the patient's benefit.
So what does that look like? What does a wellness visit look like for you?
Whatever you want it to look like for 30 minutes. So I do, a quick head to toe, look in the ears, look in the throat, blood pressure, heart, lungs. And then I have a slew of questions I ask that generally prompt, oh yeah, that has been bothering me. So I kind of ask several questions head to toe about body function and just making sure that you're feeling well, sleeping well, not overwhelmed with stress, and that your body isn't showing any of those signs and symptoms. And then as you answer questions, then we usually dive into that area a little bit more. And then at the end, it's okay, what else you got for me? And usually people pull out a notebook or their notes on their phone and ask me 5 more things that they wondered about. And that's it.
So you have an upfront fee for the visit itself, but then any additional questions that come up in the conversation, there's no surprise bills for that?
No.
Okay. There would be additional billing if you ran labs or something like that, if a question came up and that was a concern, and that's what your recommendation was though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, from physical to like head to toe to wellness of we're just going to check your basics and then that's all you get is a pretty big turnaround.
Right. It really is. And it has harmed that relationship between the patient and provider. If you're scared to bring anything up because last year you got a big $400 bill that you weren't expecting, then you're not going to be honest this year. You're not going to say, I haven't slept in 6 months and I don't know what to do about it. You're not going to say the new family history diagnosis that just popped up. You might not even ask for your refill. And that's just not good for the patient dynamic.
So if I knew I was going to have something to bring up, even just a wart on my toe, like you said, and I knew that this was kind of the strategy that's taken with insurance, could I go to a provider in a hospital and say, I want to self-pay this visit, knowing that I'm going to have this extra question, or would I still get, billed? How would that work?
Um, you couldn't really separate out the two. So if you go in for your wellness visit, but you have the side question, you couldn't say for this other part, can I do it self-pay? But you could make a different appointment and do it self-pay. You could. Secondary bill. Yeah. It'll just be reduced by X% depending on which healthcare system.
But you wouldn't just have a secondary bill. You'd have, this is a entirely different, you'd have the visit bill and then any treatment included on that as well.
If they treated the word, yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So I feel like insurance is just a foreign language for most of us. So I just want to give you an example of like a bill that someone might see, and then maybe just have you explain it to me on how to interpret it. So let's just say that you get a bill, maybe your visit was $1,000 and it was adjusted to $700, but you have to pay all $700 because you didn't hit your deductible yet. So like, what does that deducted or adjusted portion mean?
I'll throw on the little clause that I am not an insurance agent, nor am I
Understood.
a guru, but I am a consumer of many years. And I've worked in the industry for many years. So every major corporate healthcare entity that takes insurance has negotiated their plan with that insurer. So whether that be Humana or United or Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever that may be, they have an agreed upon rate. So my boys just went for their wellness visits in July, and we got their EOB, the explanation of benefits. And it showed on there the office visit procedure code, as well as their ICD-10 code. And it was, I think, 439 or 493. I have the numbers mixed, but one of those two. But we didn't owe any of that because we didn't ask any questions. And it was just, we followed all the rules of a wellness visit. So if you had an ER visit, say, and it was $1,000 reduced to $700, that means that ER had a contract with that insurance that they were only supposed to charge that less amount. But you're responsible for it because you have not met your individual or family deductible. Some plans may cover you at 70% if you're in network, or cover you at a different percentage depending on what category that medical bill falls into. But I do always encourage people to request an itemized bill after they've received their first bill, because you want to make sure, I didn't have a lab draw. Why does it say venipuncture? I didn't have any medication. Why does it say I got Tylenol? Check and just make sure that all of those services were indeed provided to you.
So how does this relate to self-pay? Like, can self-pay actually end up being cheaper in the end?
Almost universally. So that isn't, obviously if you're having surgery or chemo or other things, there's exceptions to that statement. But for routine acute care or preventative care for families, it is almost universally less expensive to do self-pay. Almost universally. There's a lot of caveats to that.
Okay. So I feel like the general mindset, though, like we talked about a little bit in the beginning, is that I have insurance, so I want to use it, right? So how do we shift society to be a little bit more open-minded to self-pay for these acute issues?
You have to have future thinking. So yes, it seems better today. It seems like I'm paying all this premium money. I should use my benefits. But in the long run, it's making healthcare more expensive for everybody, for the big things and the small things. So taking that personal accountability back will change the tides for the future and make healthcare more affordable for all of us. I think so. In January of 2022, it became a law that healthcare systems had to provide some degree of transparency. They've all embraced that a little differently. I think I've provided some links that you can share with this podcast, so people can click and see what is the cost for an MRI without contrast at Ascension versus Aurora versus Theta versus elsewhere. So they're required to give you that idea. What they aren't required to do is if you're requesting a quote for, say, a colonoscopy, they'll give you the procedure cost for the facility. That doesn't cover the anesthesiologist time, doesn't cover the biopsy, doesn't cover the surgeon's time. Those are all unique pieces. And so that's not all required to be included. So transparency doesn't really mean transparency. And the more that we require that of our healthcare providers, the more healthcare will change for the better for all of us. So self-pay is one step that we can do moving towards that.
So would your recommendation, to kind of summarize this, would it be to self-pay for the smaller things, the acute things, and then save your insurance for catastrophic?
I would, but I would also go to independent places for that self-pay. So I would find clinics that are not part of, the main corporate. If that's your passion and that's the way you want to move towards healthcare as a family, then I would find those businesses that are designed for you first. And then a second choice would be to just go self-pay within the corporate models.
How do you find them?
Motherhood Alliance. That would be the top one. If you want to look nationwide, if you have family in Texas or California or somewhere else, join thewedge.com. It's called The Wedge for Health Freedom, and it's all independent clinics of varying specialties, and you can search by zip.
Okay, that's an awesome resource. We'll include that in the show notes as well. So a couple more questions here is, what do you think the future of healthcare and insurance will look like?
Different than today. So
is that your hope or what you think it will be?
It has to be different than today. It's just not sustainable. I had pulled together a bunch of statistics and I thought that's just, depressing. I don't want to list all those off, but there are some resources that you can share in the notes to look at how outrageous cost is. And it is not sustainable for people. Medical debt is a real crisis in the US. And our healthcare isn't that great when we look at other countries. So it has to change. And that is me as an optimist, but also me being practical. It just has to. So I would love it to go back to affordable healthcare for the day-to-day needs of families with a crisis option.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So one final question. We're going to loop back to the title of this episode, and you can share any other thoughts that you have on this topic. But why, Tabitha, do you feel self-pay is smart even if you have insurance?
Because it gives you choice. And it does save you money. So healthcare is all about choices that are right for you as an individual. And you have so many more options if you're not limited in your thinking of, well, what does insurance say I can do? What healthcare system can I go to? That doctor's not covered in my plan. That is so limiting versus self-pay. I can go where I want. I can go where the best fit for me is. So I think as I've been with Löyly for 2.5 years now, I have learned that there's a lot of self-pay momentum even for testing. So herscan.com, you can get ultrasounds of one or both breasts, MDI imaging and MH imaging in the Milwaukee area, really affordable, high quality MRIs. You can even order them yourself if you go to MH imaging. Biotech and Oshkosh I use for all the x-rays and local ultrasounds that I need. Renovo Health just opened in Manitowoc, and they're offering colonoscopies, EGDs, and a few other minor procedures, all self-pay. And then you can get lab work done for sure at my place, but also LabCorp in West Bend. You can go and get self-pay labs done. So there's resources everywhere once you start looking.
Yeah, there are options. And there's what I love about what you just said is that I feel like it puts empowerment back in the family's hands of not having to feel just so handcuffed when it comes to what their choices are. You do have choices. Yeah. This was a great episode. Thank you so much, Tabitha, for diving into this topic with us. It is confusing for families. I feel like this was really needed and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving a rating or review or sharing it directly with a friend who could benefit from the information? We know that you're a busy mom or caregiver, and our goal is to make your life easier by bringing tips and tricks directly from experts into your earbuds. By sharing this episode with someone you love, you can play a critical role in helping to make their life easier as well. We appreciate your time and thank you for being a part of the Motherhood Alliance family.